today, or actually last night when I was sitting there in bed with my headache hat on, I realized that it was time to wash it. I think one of the things is I've been a little lazy about where I've been putting it in my freezer. Um, Putting it on the top or middle shelf and where it's sharing space with food next to french fries and peas and things. And that's not a good idea. I've been lazy about it. I will admit that. So before I go into the washing, I just want to really quick just remind you about the storage. Do make sure, if you can, I think the best place for them is on the bottom of the freezer by themselves with any of your ice packs. So leaving your headaches there where there's no other food on that shelf or on the door. Some freezers don't work well on the door as far as refreezing, although some people like that because they like to keep the cubes softer. That's really up to you, but just make sure that you leave it on a shelf where there's not a lot of, where there's no food really. If you have enough of these like me, they take up a whole shelf on their own anyway. And then a reminder about the storage. I'm wearing black so it's not great for visuals here, but just remember that when you're folding your headache hat, you want to make sure that the cubes are flat. They're not bumpy. And then you just flip over the edges and you really flatten it out before putting it in your bag. So when you go ahead and put it in your bag, everything is flattened in there. And you don't end up with some random bumpy cube once they freeze. And then also just being very cautious about making sure that you really put the top on. I've been lazy about this as well, where I don't put the top on tight. Just make sure that you do that, to keep out the smell. So now on to the washing. So for me, really, it's always hand washing. I do hear of people opening up the Velcro, sliding down the cubes, and taking each one out and putting them back in. That takes a long time, and I really think that hand washing does the same job, leaving it all in, and it's really easy. So just make sure that your cubes are back in place where they're supposed to be. I move mine for my ears or different things during when I'm having a migraine, so I want to just move everything back to its regular spot before washing it. And then you just start hand washing. I use warm water, not too hot. You know, these cubes aren't to be warmed or heated. I mean, you can use warm water, but you just don't put them in the microwave or anything. So get it wet. And then I just take mild dish soap. That to me has the least smell, but does the best job at actually getting the smell out. So just kind of lather it in there, and both sides, of course, and get it a little bit sudsy, but not crazy. Again, we don't want to, get this thing smelling to a point that then the smell of soap bothers you when you go to use it again. So that's kind of why I just like the really mild dish soap. I have the Method dish soap here. I mean, I'm sure any of them are fine, just whatever smell works for you. And go ahead and rinse it off. Make sure it's fully rinsed off. You can kind of squeeze out the edges, let the water drip down. Do a smell test, just make sure you got everything. Yep, that smells good to me. Good. Not overly soapy, but any food smells are out. So just wring out the edges. If you have a sink like mine with the faucet, you could leave it here hanging for a little bit and squeeze it out. Usually what I do though is, if I do that, it might be for a little while, but then usually I'll just take a dish towel and I'll set it out on the counter and get the first side dry. Just make sure when you're squeezing this out, you're not stretching it. The material, will stretch. So just make sure that you get it back into shape, like as if you had a nice sweater that you were hanging out to dry after hand washing it. So you can leave it out here. What you can also do is just pat it dry with your dish towel, again, getting off that, and then kind of just leave it there and come back in a couple of hours and then flip it over. Or if your dish towel is getting too damp, just get a new one to lay it on and flip it over on the other side. It's that easy, washing your headache hat, but make sure that you don't get lazy and take care of it when you're putting it in the freezer so you don't have to wash it too often.